Okay, good evening. So this is our first class in 2026. Now, carrying over from what we were discussing in the last class on 20th of December, that is 3 weeks back, we had discussed about we concluded with a discussion on the elasticity of demand and supply. That means we were discussing about price elasticity of demand and supply. Then we also discussed about the income elasticity of demand and cross price elasticity of demand. Based on the cross price elasticity of demand, we also discussed about when two goods can be considered based on the sign, that is the sign of the cross price elasticity of demand. We elaborated that on when two goods can be considered as substitutes or complements. Today, we will carry this discussion further into discussing about two other things related to the elasticities. One is the long run and short run elasticity, another is the point and arc elasticity. Now, what is this long run elasticity versus short run elasticity? Till now, what we have discussed in the last class, that is, if I consider the own price elasticity of demand and own price elasticity of supply, this is what we will be referring to when we discuss between the long run price elasticity and short run price elasticity. So we'll be referring only to the own price elasticity of demand. So we have also discussed about the elasticity versus elastic versus inelastic demand versus unitary elastic demand. Now, what happens? There are certain goods. Let's say when we talk about the goods which are more essential in nature, there are certain goods which are more essential in nature. So, no matter whatever may be the price, you will always demand a certain amount of that good for meeting your requirements, given the essential nature of that good. That means even if the price is too high or even if the price is too low, your demand is not going to vary that much. Okay. That means in this case, even with a very significant percentage change in the price level, there will not be any significant percentage in the quantity demanded. So what does that translate into? That translates into borrowing from our definition of the own price elasticity of demand. In such cases, with a 1% change in the price level of that commodity, there will be less than 1% change in the quantity demanded of that commodity. That means basically in the long run, the elasticities that we refer to of demand are usually much less. Okay, they're usually much less because it is not possible for you to drastically either reduce or drastically either increase the quantity demanded of such commodity, especially when it comes to the situations of price rise. But will it be so in the long run? It will not be. Why it will not be? Because let's say you're using a certain good which you cannot, reduce using immediately, even if there is a huge price increase. Okay. But over a period of time, what can happen? Certain alternatives or certain substitutes to that good may emerge, which will give you this, which will fulfill your requirements in a similar manner. So what will happen in the long run with respect to such commodities when several other alternatives or options are available? What will happen? In such scenario, you will be able to reduce the quantity demanded of that commodity. That means in the long run, what will happen that with a 1% increase in the price of that commodity, chances are very high that there will be more than 1% quantity demanded of that commodity. That means in the long run, own price elasticity of demand tends to be much more elastic because of the availability of other alternatives or options or choices. Okay. And you can also recalibrate your requirements, even if no alternatives or options are available. You can recalibrate your requirements in the long run. Now, the same thing can also happen. Same thing can also happen with respect. Similar such situation can also happen with respect to the long run versus short run supply. Okay, so in the short run, even if the price is rising, you cannot increase the quantity supplied significantly in the short run. But in the long run, what will happen when there is a percentage increase, when there is increase in the price of the commodity, you will now look for other sources of raw materials that will help you to increase the production more over the long run than in the short run. That means similar to that of the demand situation, in the long run also we can come across situations where the long run price elasticity of supply will be more than what is there in the short run. Okay, so this is all about the long run versus short run price elasticities of demand and supply. Now, you can encounter certain situations whereby it can happen that in the long run, you can come across situations where the long run price elasticity of demand or the long run price elasticity of supply can actually be less than that in the short run. Now, when can such situations arise? I would request you to go through chapter number 2 that I've already referred to. Chapter number 2. Now, coming to the second topic related to the elasticity, which we are going to discuss, is that of point and arc elasticity. So, what the concepts of elasticity that we have discussed in the last class, which is on 28th, refers to what is known as the point elasticity. So, point elasticity means, let's say, if I'm moving from point A to point B along with the demand curve, that means I'm moving from point A to point B downward along the demand curve. So point A is the higher point and point B is the lower point along the demand curve. So when I'm moving down from point A to point B, what is happening? The price is dropping and the quantity demanded is rising. Okay. So in this case, the price elasticity of demand that I'm going to calculate when I move from point A to point B will be with respect to point A. Okay. Similarly, if you reverse the movement of if you reverse the direction of movement, that means if you are now moving from point B to point A upward along the demand curve, that means we are moving from point B to point A upward along the demand curve. What is going to happen? The price is going to rise, whereas the quantity demanded is going to fall. Now, in this case, what will happen? The elasticity of demand that we are now going to calculate will be with respect to point B. Now, the interesting aspect of this point elasticity of demand is this: we are moving between these 2 points. In case 1, we have moved from point A to point B, whereas in the second case, we have moved from point B to point A. That means the movement is between the same 2 points. Interestingly, the point elasticity that we have calculated with respect to point A will be altogether different when we calculate the same with respect to point B, even if we are moving between the same 2 points. That means even if we calculate the reduction in the price, or even if we calculate the change in the price as well as the change in the quantity demanded, they are the same in absolute terms. That means ignoring the negative sign or the positive sign. In absolute terms, they are the same. They are of the same quantity as we move from point A to point B, or vice versa. But the percentage change calculated will be altogether different, and hence, in this case, the point elasticities of demand at point A and point B will be different. Now, in order to address this problem, what do? We calculate something which is known as the arc elasticity of demand. So what is this concept of arc elasticity of demand? Arc elasticity of demand, basically, we calculate somewhat a weighted average of the point elasticities at point A as well as at point B. It is a weighted average. So this weighted average helps us to remove a discrepancy that exists when we consider two different point elasticities, that at point A as well as point B, and provides us with a single value of elasticity of demand, which is nothing but the weighted average of the point elasticities at both point A as well as at point B. So this is all about the conceptual difference between the point and arc elasticity, and how do we derive the arc elasticity by taking into account the point elasticities at two different points. Okay. So this is about all the elasticities which we had discussed in the last class, that is on 20th, as well as today. Now, after this, we will next move on to chapter 3 of that same book, which I have already shared with you. And now we will be formally entering into the theory of consumer behavior. So, when we talk about the theory of consumer behavior, there are 3 aspects. So, what is our purpose? What is the purpose of, studying about the consumer behavior as well as the producer behavior? because both the consumers and the producers are interacting with each other in the market to maximize their objective. Consumers maximize their satisfaction subject to their subject to certain constraints. Producers maximize their profit again subject to certain constraints. Now, this is the main reason why we study about each of these stakeholders' behavior in detail and separately. Now, when it comes to studying about consumer behavior, there are three aspects of consumer behavior. What are these three aspects of consumer behavior? The first aspect is the consumer preferences. The second aspect is the budget constraint, and the third aspect is the consumer choice. Now, you will find again in common discussion, or let's say in common chat, or rather if I say the gossip amongst the laymen, the words preferences and choice are used interchangeably. That means whenever any two individuals, laymen, are discussing between themselves, they use these two terms interchangeably, preferences and choices, to convey the same meaning. But preferences and choices do not convey the same meaning. Can you tell me what is the difference between the meaning of these two terms exactly? That is, what do we understand by preferences, and what do we understand by choice? Can you elaborate on that, even using some examples? Can you do that?
So preferences means what the consumer actually prefers.
And then what is choice?
Choice means what the consumer really wants.
No, you actually told in a somewhat opposite manner. When it comes to the preferences, let's say if you are being shown a menu without the price tag, if you're being shown a menu without the price tag, that means I am asking about your likes and dislikes, which you like more, which you like less, or which you dislike more, or which you dislike less. That is all about the preferences. But moment I bring the price factor, that means now you'll have to select something amongst your likes and dislikes, more than the dislikes amongst your likes. So given the price question factored into, now you have to make a selection amongst your likings. That's the choice. So first you start with what are your likings and dislikings. Okay. Then based on your likings and dislikings, now you next come to what you're going to select once you factor in the price. Okay. So that's why when we start with the theory of consumer behavior, we start with the consumer preferences. So when we talk about the consumer preferences, basically we try to compare between bundles or the basket of consumption or consumption baskets of consumption bundles. To begin with, we always consider a two commodity world for to make the analysis simple. We consider two commodity world where we label these two commodities as X and Y to begin with. Now, then we consider different bundles of X and Y containing different quantities of either X or Y or both. That means when we are considering different bundles of X and Y, there can be two situations. Let's say if we consider two bundles, in one of the bundle, if we consider two bundles, then means in between these two bundles, the quantity of X may be same while the quantity of Y are different, or the quantity of Y may be the same while the quantity of X are different, or in both these bundles, both the quantities of X and Y are different. So these three types of situations can arise when we compare between any two commodity bundles of X and Y, or maybe several commodity bundles of X and Y. So this is our starting point. Now, based on this two commodity world assumption, there are several axioms of consumer preferences. So what are the several axioms of consumer preferences? The first axiom of consumer preference is that of axiom of completeness. So what do we mean by the axiom of completeness? Completeness means that the consumer is able to compare amongst all the available consumer bundles of X and Y, or the consumption bundles of X and Y. That means there are no bundles left which the consumer, there are no such bundles left which the consumer is unable to compare with the other available consumption bundles. So that is the axiom of completeness. That means either consumer will, so let us consider there are two bundles. So axiom of completeness states this thing very clearly, that either consumer will prefer bundle A over bundle B, or bundle B over bundle A, or the consumer will be indifferent between bundle A and bundle B. That means he, in the third situation, he will view both the bundles, that is bundle A and bundle B, to be similar. This is axiom of completeness. The second axiom is that of axiom of reflexiveness. What is this axiom of reflexiveness? Let's say if I consider consumer bundle A, the consumer will prefer, will at least prefer consumer, the consumer will at least prefer bundle A over itself. That means the consumer will be at least as good as bundle A vis-a-vis with respect to bundle A. That's what it means. Axiom of reflexivity. That means there will be no such situation where consumer is strictly preferring bundle A over bundle A. That means if I consider bundle A over itself, so the consumer is at least good with bundle A over itself. That means there will be neither preference nor indifference when it comes to bundle A itself. The third axiom is the axiom of transitivity. So how do we elaborate on this axiom of transitivity? Let's say there are three consumer bundles. Now, case one, when I'm comparing between bundle A and bundle B. So I prefer bundle A over bundle B. Done. Now, case two. Now I consider two consumer bundles, that is bundle B and bundle C. So what is now happening? I now prefer bundle B over bundle C. So in the first case, I prefer bundle A over bundle B. Second case, I prefer bundle B over bundle C. So what does the axiom of transitivity say? The axiom of transitivity says if this is the situation whereby A is preferred over B and B is preferred over C, A will be preferred over C. It cannot be the other way around, that is C is preferred over A. So this is about the axiom of transitivity. Now, there is the fourth axiom, which is axiom of non-cessation. So what is this axiom of non-cessation? Axiom of non-cessation says that more is better. That means there are two commodity bundles. Okay? Now, bundle A and bundle B. Now, both bundle A and bundle B contain the same amount of X. But bundle B contains more amount of Y than bundle A. So in this situation, the consumer will prefer bundle B over bundle A. Because in this case, the quantity of at least one commodity, which is Y, is more in bundle B than in bundle A. And hence, the consumer will prefer bundle B over bundle A. And this is all about the axiom of non-cessation. Now, there is the one more axiom which is not that much pronounced, is that is the axiom of convexity. So, what is this axiom of convexity? Let us consider two commodity bundles, that is commodity bundle A and commodity bundle B. Okay. Now, what does the axiom of uh, convexity says? The axiom of convexity says that if I take a weighted average of these two commodity bundles, that is bundle A and this bundle B. So what I'm doing, I'm creating a new commodity bundle, which is nothing but a weighted average of the commodity bundle A and commodity bundle B. Now, this new commodity bundle, which we will be labeling as commodity bundle C, will be at least as preferred over commodity bundle A and commodity bundle B. That means when it will be I'll be comparing commodity bundle C with respect to commodity bundle A, C will be at least as good as commodity bundle A. Similarly, when I'll be comparing commodity bundle C, which is this average commodity bundle with commodity bundle B, then this commodity bundle C will be at least as preferred as commodity bundle B. And hence we say, with respect to this convexity axiom, the average is preferred over the extremes. So in this case, the extreme bundles are commodity bundle A and commodity bundle B. And the average bundle in this case is commodity bundle C. And convexity axiom says that the commodity bundle C will be at least as preferred, if not strictly preferred, over both commodity bundle A as well as commodity bundle B. So this is all about the consumer preferences. Now the question that you will be asking is this, that what is the purpose of spelling out all these axioms with respect to the consumer preferences? The purpose of spelling out all these axioms of consumer preferences is to enable us to derive something which is known as the indifference curve. So what is this indifference curve? Indifference curve is, if you look at the relevant diagram in chapter number 3, so I'll be mentioning it later when I send the material. Chapter number 3, there is a diagram where using these axioms of consumer preferences, this indifference curve is being drawn. Now, what is this indifference curve? So for drawing the indifference curve, we need a two-dimensional plane. So when we derive the demand curve or when we derive the supply curve, we discussed about this two-dimensional plane. That is the XY axis plane. So XY axis is the horizontal axis, Y axis is the vertical axis. So in case of deriving the indifference curve, we are denoting the X axis with respect to commodity X and Y axis with respect to commodity Y. And they are meeting each other or crossing each other at the origin O. Now, indifference curves will be something which will be a curved graph. It is neither a straight line downward, it is neither a straight line downward sloping or an upward sloping line. It is a downward sloping curve. Okay. So it is curved like a bow and it is curved towards the origin. That means the bow shaped curve is bowed towards the origin. If I consider a bow, that means arrow bow, so the bow, so it is bowed towards the origin. So this is how the indifference curve looks like. Now the question will be asked then, sir, what is this indifference curve? So this indifference curve is made up of infinite number of points. Technically, an indifference curve is made up of infinite number of points. What do these points represent? These points actually represent different quantities of X commodity and Y commodity. That means technically, this infinite number of points along any indifference curve represent different consumption bundles or commodity bundles containing different quantities of X and Y. So what do these different consumer bundles, infinite number of different consumer bundles along the indifference curve denote? So indifference curves contain all those infinite number of consumer bundles or commodity bundles that give the consumer the same level of satisfaction or utility. That means in case of all these infinite number of consumer bundles along an indifference curve, these consumer bundles are indifferent to each other. Why they're indifferent to each other? Because the consumers don't prefer any one bundle over the other bundles along this indifference curve. So he or she is deriving the same amount of utility from any of these consumer bundles that lie along a given indifference curve. And this is how the indifference curve has been defined or derived. So that means indifference curve is nothing but the locus of those infinite number of consumer bundles that provide or give the consumer the same level of satisfaction or utility. That means along this indifference curve, the consumer is indifferent to all these consumer bundles. He neither prefers one consumer bundle over the other consumer bundles. That's it. Okay. Now the question is this, sir, then technically, how do we derive these indifference curve? In order to derive this indifference curve, which I'll be discussing in the next class, since I am not referred to that diagram exactly, so it will not be easy for you to understand. So I'll be discussing about the ways to derive this indifference curve in the next class. What we do basically, we take any point in that xy plane. That means in that xy plane where I am considering a point that is giving me a given amount of x and y. That means it is representing a given commodity bundle. Through that point, that is the point that is representing a given commodity bundle, I draw two perpendicular lines. That means the lines that are intersecting each other at 90 degree at that point that is representing a given commodity bundle. So what happens? I divide that entire XY plane into four different quadrants: quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Then, using the consumer preferences which we've discussed just some time back, we try to derive or narrow down to those consumer bundles that lie along a given curve to derive the indifference curve. The details of this, how to derive in a stepwise fashion, I will be discussing in the next class. So before I do that, I now move on to the next aspect of consumer preference, which is the budget constraint. So when I talk about the budget constraint, since you are students of accounting, I believe, can you tell me what do you understand by the term budget? What do you understand by the term budget?
So any specified amount which will
Pardon?
remain constant.
Can
So
you
any
repeat?
specified amount which will be remaining constant.
Okay. Then what?
So this
It
much.
is it is based on your accounting principle. It is actually showing, it is actually equating your income side as well as your expenditure side. So when I talk about the budget, basically budget is showing me the statement of account statements of both income as well as the expenditure. That's what budget is all about. Now, why there is a constraint? Because if the income is given, so in order to balance both the sides of the budget, the expenditure cannot exceed the income. Right, I have to balance it. So the concept of the budget is this, which is showing me the incomes of the consumer as well as the expenditure side of the consumer. So when I'm talking about something which is known as a budget constraint, effectively, I'm using the level of income of the consumer to put a limit on the expenditures which the consumer can make on the two commodities, that is commodity X and commodity Y. Higher the income, higher will be the budget constraint and vice versa. Okay. Now, when I talk about the budget constraint, I make an assumption. So, what is the assumption? The assumption is this: the consumer neither saves nor borrows. That means his expenditure is exactly provided for by his current income, by his or her current income. He neither exceeds that nor he spends below that. So this is another aspect of the budget constraint and another assumption. Now, in order to define the budget constraint more specifically, I need two more things apart from the income of the consumer. What are those two more things? Those two more things are the per unit price of commodity X and per unit price of commodity Y. Because once I define the per unit price of both these two commodities, that is commodity X and commodity Y, I will be able to figure out the maximum amount of either X or Y or both X and Y that I can buy, or that on which are the amount that I can spend subject to my level of income. That is the budget constraint. Now, what is the maximum amount of X that I can buy, or what is the maximum amount of Y that I can buy? This is being done by taking recourse to a very simple process. What is the simple process? The concept is this, that the maximum amount of X I can buy only when I'm not buying anything of Y. That means I'll be buying only X. So using the unit price of X and dividing the income that I have at my disposal by the unit price of X, I get the maximum quantity of X that I can buy. Okay. Similarly, what is the maximum amount of Y that I can buy? The maximum amount of Y that I can buy is when I'm not buying anything of X. And how do I get the maximum amount of Y that I can buy? I divide the income that is available by the per unit price of Y to get the maximum amount of Y that I can buy. So what do we get now? We get when I'm buying the maximum amount of X, the amount of Y that I buy is 0. Similarly, when I'm buying the maximum amount of Y, the amount of X that I buy is equal to 0. So in the real world situation, usually I buy both of X and Y. It is not either or. I buy both of X and Y. That means the amount of X and Y that I can buy will be between these two quantities. That means the amount of X that I can buy will be positive but less than the maximum amount of X. Similarly, the amount of Y that I can buy will be positive but less than the maximum amount of Y. Okay. Now, one more thing, since I am neither saving nor borrowing, technically it means what? Technically it means I'm exhausting my income. Also, I am spending on both the commodities, that is X and Y. Okay. Now, combining the first aspects of consumer behavior, that is consumer preferences as well as budget constraint, what do I get? I get a situation, or I will get to a point where I am buying positive quantities of both X and Y. So it will not be a situation where I am buying only of X, where I am buying only of Y, but I am buying positive quantities of both X and Y. So a situation where I buy positive quantities of both X and Y is something which is referred to in consumer behavior as interior solution. That means the point where I'm maximizing my utility and I'm buying positive quantities of both X and Y. So that point or that solution is known as interior solution. Otherwise, it will be a corner solution. Corner solution means what? I am at the either extreme. That means I am buying either X but no Y, or I am buying either Y but no X. Usually, such situation doesn't arise. Those are only exceptions rather than being the normal. In the normal situation, we buy both of X and Y. Okay? Questions? Any questions, anyone?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, we have got the consumer preferences. We have got the budget constraint. Now we combine these two aspects. That means my consumer preferences that gives me my likes and dislikes, my relative liking, between comparisons and the price situation as well as income situation that I face. Now, combining these two aspects gets me to the third aspect of consumer behavior, which is consumer choice. So, consumer choice is now actualizing my decision. That means whatever decision I am now making, I am executing that decision and I am selecting that consumer bundle that maximizes my objective or that satisfies my or that fulfills my objective, which is that of maximizing my satisfaction or utility. Okay. Now, what are the implications of this? Combining the consumer preferences and the budget constraint to get me to the third aspect of consumer preferences, sorry, consumer behavior, that is consumer choice. That means the final selection or the actual selection of the consumption bundle which I'm making that maximizes my utility. So, how this decision of choosing the consumer bundle be affected? It can be affected by changes in any of the two aspects of consumer behavior. That is, either change in the consumer preferences or change in the budget constraint or both. Now, let us consider the second aspect of consumer behavior, which is budget constraint. What happens if my income level rises? That means what is happening? My budget constraint is being relaxed. So if my budget constraint is being relaxed, I can now choose a consumer bundle that will be containing at least one of more commodity, if not more of both the commodities, more of one commodity, if not more of both the commodities, when my budget constraint is being relaxed. That means now my commodity bundle that I choose will be different from what I was choosing earlier, and hence the consumer choice will be different. Now, the reverse can happen when my budget constraint is being tightened. That means my income level is less. What can happen if price of one of the commodity changes? Let's say one of the commodity becomes relatively cheaper while the other commodity the price remains unchanged. In this case, what can happen? I can now buy more of at least one commodity, if not both the commodities. That means again I choose a different consumer bundle. Now, one more thing can also happen. What is happening? Income level doesn't change, but the prices of both the commodity changes. That means, let's say the price of both the commodities are doubled. So what will happen? The purchasing power of my income level will now drop, and hence I'll now consume less of both the commodities. That means again my consumer choice is affected. So all these possibilities remain when I affect the second aspect of consumer behavior, which is budget constraint. What happens when I affect the first aspect of consumer behavior, which is the consumer preferences? Let's say now it can happen that my preferences are changing. That means my likings and dislikings are changing. So if my likings and dislikings are changing, it can altogether change the ranking of the consumer bundles. So previously, I had more. I let's say I was preferring those consumer bundles that contain relatively more of Y than X. But let's say now my preferences change. Now what is happening? I now prefer those bundles more that contain relatively more of X than Y. So once there is a change in my consumer preferences, so when I combine that with the second aspect, that is the budget constraint, that will altogether lead to different choice or different selection of consumer bundle or consumption bundle or commodity bundle. Hence, change in either of these two aspects of consumer behavior, that is either consumer preference or budget constraint or both, can altogether lead to a different consumer choice or a different selection of the consumption bundle. So now you can see what is the connection between these three different aspects of consumer behavior. That is consumer preferences, budget constraint that leads us to consumer choice. So any questions, anyone? Any
No, sir.
questions? Okay. So I stop here today. In the next class, I'll be discussing in more details how to derive the indifference curve and how to combine that with the budget constraint to derive the actual consumer bundle that maximizes the consumer satisfaction or utility. Okay. So I stop here today and thank you and good night.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Mhm.